Breaking news, Savannah Guthrie's mother, Nancy Guthrie, missing day 30. This as new video footage uncovered.
On the morning of February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie did not show up to church. That single absence set in motion one of the most closely watched missing persons investigations in recent American history. 30 days later, the 84-year-old mother of NBC Today show anchor Savannah Guthrie has not been found. No arrest has been made. No suspect has been publicly named by law enforcement. And the questions at the center of this case remain, as of this broadcast, unanswered. What investigators do have is a timeline, a pacemaker, a doorbell camera, and now footage from a neighbor's Ring camera capturing vehicles moving through a residential back road in the early hours of the morning. Nancy disappeared. One of those vehicles passed the camera 8 minutes after Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker stopped syncing to her phone. That detail would become one of the most significant pieces of evidence to emerge in 30 days of investigation. But to understand why it matters, you have to go back to the beginning. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old and lived in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona. By all accounts, she was an active woman engaged in her community and connected to her family. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, is one of the most recognizable faces in American broadcast journalism, the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. That public profile would later become central to how this case reached a national audience. But on the night of January 31st into the early hours of February 1st, none of that visibility prevented what authorities believe was a deliberate abduction from Nancy Guthrie's own home. She was reported missing on February 1st when she failed to appear at a scheduled church event. That was when family members contacted authorities. And that was when the Pima County Sheriff's Office and the FBI began what would become a 30-day investigation, one that has expanded in scope, produced tens of thousands of tips, generated multiple ransom demands, and still, as of day 30, has not produced an arrest. From the earliest hours of the investigation, authorities were working with a narrow but precise piece of evidence. Nancy Guthrie wears a pacemaker. That device syncs via Bluetooth to her iPhone. On the night she disappeared, that connection went silent at approximately 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. That timestamp gave investigators something concrete. Not a witness account, not a neighbor's recollection, a medical device logging the moment its connection to her phone was lost. Whether that disconnection occurred because Nancy was moved out of Bluetooth range or because something else interrupted. The signal, investigators have not publicly confirmed, but that 2:28 a.m. marker became the anchor point for everything that followed. 8 minutes later, at approximately 2:36 a.m., a vehicle was captured on a Ring doorbell camera belonging to a neighbor located roughly 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. The camera faced a back road, one that is not heavily traveled, but one that investigators note connects directly to the route leading away from Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood. The vehicle was moving at what observers described as a high rate of speed for a dark residential road at that hour of the morning. That footage was not initially within the 2-mile perimeter law enforcement had established around the crime scene. It was outside the radius, and according to reporting, the FBI initially indicated the footage did not rise to the level of significance. They later reversed that position. The Ring camera footage, obtained and reported by Fox News, captured 12 vehicles traveling that back road between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st, 12 vehicles on a road that, according to those familiar with the area, sees minimal nighttime traffic. Of those 12 vehicles, one passes at 2:36 a.m. Online observers have identified that vehicle as a possible Kia Soul. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed the make or model. What investigators are now examining is whether that vehicle, or any of the others captured on that footage, can be connected to the abduction. Former FBI special agents who have reviewed the footage publicly have noted that while the resolution does not provide license plate detail, it is sufficient to allow follow-up investigation. It establishes presence, it establishes direction, and it establishes timing. The significance of surveillance footage in major investigations is well documented. The identification of Brian Kohberger in the Idaho student murders began in part with a white Elantra captured on gas station surveillance. The identification of the individual responsible for Molly Tibbetts' death was aided by unusual markings on a vehicle caught on residential security cameras. In both cases, a vehicle did not solve the crime on its own, it provided direction. and direction in a case with over 10,000 hours of accumulated surveillance footage is what investigators are now working to establish. On the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared, a masked individual was captured on her doorbell camera at her front porch. That footage was released publicly by the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Office in the days following her disappearance, in an effort to generate leads from the public. The footage shows a figure whose identity has not been confirmed. In the weeks since its release, online observers have identified what they describe as a possible tattoo on the suspect's right wrist and what appears to be a star-shaped marking on the strap of the individual's backpack or jacket. Law enforcement has not confirmed either detail as a verified identifying characteristic. Pima County officials have specifically cautioned the public that some claims circulating on social media about the doorbell footage are, in their words, purely speculative. There is also an object visible in the footage that has generated significant analytical discussion. The object appears to extend from the individual's pocket and has been described by some analysts as a possible antenna. One theory, offered by security professionals who have reviewed the footage, is that the device could be a signal jammer. Signal jammers are devices that broadcast radio frequencies on the same bands used by home security systems, including Nest and Ring cameras connected to residential Wi-Fi. They operate within a range of approximately 25 to 50 meters and can prevent those devices from sending push notifications, triggering alarms, or alerting monitoring services. These devices are illegal to use in the United States. They are commercially available online for as little as $30 to $40. Their use in residential burglaries, home invasions, and abductions has been documented in prior cases. Whether the object in the doorbell footage is in fact a signal jammer has not been confirmed by law enforcement. What has been confirmed is that the Nest camera inside Nancy Guthrie's home did not capture the events of that night in the way the family might have expected. The doorbell footage exists. The interior surveillance, by accounts of what was and wasn't released, appears to have been limited or interrupted. At this point in the investigation, law enforcement has not publicly addressed why interior footage was or was not available. On February 13th, 12 days after Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, law enforcement conducted a SWAT raid on a Tucson area. Residents belonging to a 37-year-old man named Luke Daly was detained and questioned. His 77-year-old mother, also present, was questioned as well. Both were released. No charges were filed. Daly has since spoken publicly. In an interview released on March 2nd, he stated clearly that he had nothing to do with the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. He acknowledged that online speculation had identified him as a possible match for the masked individual in the doorbell footage, and he rejected that characterization. He urged the public not to be drawn into what he described as a hive mind, fueled by amateur online investigation. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has stated publicly that his department has no names they are currently investigating in connection with the disappearance. That statement, made in the context of ongoing investigative activity, places the case at a procedural stage where evidence is being processed but has not yet produced a confirmed lead sufficient to name a suspect. Days after Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, TMZ reported receiving a ransom demand. The demand was described as highly sophisticated and involved a request for cryptocurrency payment. The dollar amount cited was described as similar to a prior demand of approximately $6 million. TMZ reported that the communication graphically described consequences if the ransom was not paid. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed the ransom demands, their origin, or their authenticity. What has been reported additionally, and not confirmed by law enforcement, is that experts who reviewed the ransom communications believe they may have been generated using artificial intelligence. If accurate, that detail carries investigative significance. AI-generated text retains certain structural and linguistic patterns that can be identified through forensic analysis tools now available to federal investigators. Whether that analysis is being conducted and what it has produced has not been publicly disclosed. Among the physical evidence collected from Nancy Guthrie's home is a mixed DNA sample. That sample was submitted to a private laboratory in Florida for analysis. Pima County Sheriff Nanos confirmed publicly that the lab has encountered what he described as challenges with the mixed DNA. Mixed DNA samples, those containing genetic material from more than one individual, present well-documented difficulties in forensic analysis. Separating contributor profiles requires sophisticated deconvolution techniques, and results can take significantly longer than single contributor samples. The lab is continuing to process the evidence. No results have been publicly disclosed. Law. Enforcement also collected and reviewed cell phone tower data from the area around the time of the abduction. The practice of analyzing tower data for location patterns has produced results in prior cases. In the Koberger investigation, cell tower records helped establish a pattern of movement in the period before the crime. Whether tower analysis in the Nancy Guthrie case has produced comparable intelligence has not been confirmed. By the end of February, the FBI had relocated the primary operational hub for the investigation from its Tucson satellite office to the Phoenix Field Division, the agency's largest office in Arizona. Law enforcement sources and analysts who commented publicly characterized this move not as a reduction in investigative activity, but as a consolidation. Moving personnel and resources to a facility with greater analytical capacity, more personnel, and direct access to federal prosecutors was described as a transition from fieldwork to evidence processing. Federal prosecutors have been involved in the investigation. A walkthrough of Nancy Guthrie's home was conducted with prosecutors present, a step that analysts have noted is consistent with building a prosecutorial framework around gathered evidence. The home has since been cleared for return to the family, indicating that law enforcement considers its physical evidence collection from the scene to be complete. As of day 30, the investigation has accumulated over 10,000 hours of surveillance footage. More than 40,000 tips have been received. Approximately 1,500 to 2,000 new tips came in following Savannah Guthrie's most recent public appeal, in which she announced the $1 million reward could be paid in cash and that tips could be submitted anonymously. The total reward is now reported at over $1.2 million. The investigation has also extended beyond the United States border. A group of mothers acting independently of law enforcement began conducting searches extending into northern Mexico. Their effort drew attention to a question investigators had already been pursuing. The FBI confirmed it had contacted state authorities in Sonora, Mexico, which shares a border with Arizona. The closest major port of entry to Tucson is Nogales. The FBI maintains a liaison presence in Sonora, and through that office, Mexican authorities were asked to conduct welfare and whereabouts checks at hospitals, jails, and medical examiner offices. They were also asked to query border crossing records and activate any available intelligence networks. Mexican state authorities confirmed to sources that the FBI had made contact. They also confirmed that, based on their initial investigation, there was no evidence that Nancy Guthrie had crossed into Mexico. That confirmation narrows one avenue of inquiry. It does not close the case. On March 1st, a separate incident brought new attention to the neighborhood around Nancy Guthrie's home. A 34-year-old man named Antonio Pina Compost was arrested on misdemeanor driving under the influence charges after law enforcement observed him driving past Nancy Guthrie's residence between 50 and 100 times over the course of an evening, traveling at low speed while looking at a photograph of Nancy Guthrie on his phone. No connection between Pina Compost and the disappearance has been established. The arrest was on a misdemeanor charge unrelated to the abduction investigation. On March 2nd, day 30, Savannah Guthrie was seen publicly for the first time since her mother's disappearance. She was photographed outside her mother's home with her brother and sister laying flowers. She shared a photograph from that visit, writing in part that the family could feel the love and asking the public not to stop praying and hoping with them. The family also announced a donation of $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a gesture Savannah framed as a recognition that their family's experience is not unique, that millions of other families are living with the same uncertainty. That the attention this case has received is attention other cases deserve as well. 30 days into this investigation, the structure of what is known and what is not known can be stated plainly. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, was taken from her home in Tucson, Arizona in the early hours of February 1st, 2026. A masked individual was captured on doorbell camera at her front porch that night. Her pacemaker stopped syncing to her phone at 2:28 in the morning. A vehicle was captured on a neighbor's Ring camera 8 minutes later, 2.5 miles away, moving at speed on a road that leads out of her neighborhood. Blood was found. At her front door, mixed DNA was collected and is being analyzed. Ransom demands have been reported. A SWAT raid was conducted and produced no arrest. The FBI has consolidated its investigation in Phoenix. Over 40,000 tips have been received. Over 10,000 hours of footage are being processed. Federal prosecutors have walked through the crime scene. No suspect has been named. No arrest has been made. The reward stands at over $1.2 million, payable in cash, claimable anonymously. What the investigation produces next will depend on what is inside those hours of footage, what the DNA lab in Florida determines, what the cell tower analysis reveals, and whether anyone who knows something about the masked figure on that doorbell camera decides that the information they are holding is worth more than their silence. As of March 2nd, 2026, day 30, Nancy Guthrie has not been found.